Greetings. It's the Forsetti. I wanted to talk a little bit about Diablo 4 Hardcore. So I have been playing Hardcore in Diablo 4 for the past 2 seasons. I decided to try it first in Season 11 when the Paladin came out, because Paladin seemed like the perfect Hardcore class. Being able to get up to 100% block chance and 70% mitigation from block just seemed to work extremely well with Hardcore, and it does. So I got the itch, I gave it a shot, and overall I've had a lot of fun in Hardcore, but I wanted to give my perspective on why I think, with Season 13, with the big update coming in a few weeks, and getting the Warlock and all of that, I will probably be switching back to softcore. Just on balance, I don't think hardcore has been worth it to me overall, and I think it's a shame because if a few things were to change, it would probably be a lot better. But first, let's briefly go over the pros of hardcore. So, the reason that I was interested in hardcore initially is because I want some sort of actual tangible consequence in a game. It's not really super fun if you achieve all of these great things, but there was no major consequence along the way to achieving that. It kind of dampens the experience of having great achievement in a game, and I think just in general. So I felt like consequence was very much so lacking in softcore, because you die and then you say, okay, so what? I go to town and I repair my gear for like 1,000 gold, and then I go back to fighting again. There are very minor consequences in certain areas. For instance, Infernal Hordes, you lose half of your Aether or whatever it is. Whatever your Infernal... not Infernal Hordes. In Helltide, you lose half of your currency in Helltide on death, which... it's very minor in the scheme of things. And then in Infernal Hordes, if you die, however many times it is, like 3, I can't remember the exact number, but you can, fail the horde, I guess. So there are minor consequences to death in softcore, but again, they didn't really feel tangible to me. It didn't feel like I was really risking anything. So I was seeking more consequence, and hardcore most certainly gives that. The other pro for hardcore is that the economy is definitely much more healthy overall. So for an average person playing the game in hardcore, the odds that they're going to be able to participate in the trading market and buy things that they need for their build at endgame is much, much higher. And I think that's a very positive aspect, because if you're going to have a live service game, then being able to get benefit from participating in live service aspects of the game, like trading with other players on a server, is kind of the whole reason to have that live service game, right? If you're just playing solo self-found, then you might as well be not on a live service game, in my opinion. So those are kind of the biggest pros to me. Kind of a short list, but they are pretty big ones, I would say. But now for the cons. So before I get into the cons, I do want to give a little context. So here we are in Season 12, right? You can see I'm in the butcher's shop here. You can see my hardcore in the top right. I have farmed up Paragon 300, which was extremely easy this season, using Bloodied Infernal Hordes compasses on Torment level 3, especially when we had the XP buff active. It didn't take me very long at all. I did it in a couple days. So it was cool to hit Paragon 300. It's the first time I've done that in a season. May very well be the last time. I've made every class. I've gotten every class to at least Torment 3. The classes I have played the most by far are Paladin and Sorc. I've also played a fair amount of Rogue. Flurry Rogue has been quite fun this season. But by far my favorite build, both this season and last season, has been Crackling Energy Sorc. It just feels extremely strong in all aspects: AoE, bossing, mobility, survivability, all of the things. So I can briefly show you my gear here. It's definitely far from like the best gear ever. My best piece of gear is probably the Temerity because I got Greater Affix, Rampage, Intelligence, and I got a perfect aspect. And my worst piece of gear is probably my boots. There's a lot to be desired on those. But yeah, overall my gear is, I would say, probably like an 8.5 out of 10. It's pretty good. And this build has been quite strong. And then my Paragon, with my glyphs, they're all at least rank 82. I could push them higher, but I haven't really felt like it's necessary because I'm already doing all of the things that I want to be doing at endgame anyways. I have done basically all endgame content short of blood-soaked sigils. My highest pit tier I've done is a pit tier 90. I have intentionally avoided going to pit tier 100 because I really don't want to have to deal with getting blood-soaked sigils. So I would say I've played a lot of the season, so I have a lot of like context to give, and my thoughts and opinions I feel are well informed by probably about 100 hours or so of gameplay this season. Okay, so cons of hardcore. So obviously the biggest thing would be the permadeath of it all. Now it's kind of weird to say as a hardcore player that permadeath is a big con in hardcore, but it is. And I think the biggest culprit is that there's no default disconnect immunity without having a scroll of escape in your inventory. And I do understand the argument from Blizzard's standpoint and from other players in the hardcore community, which is, you know, people will abuse disconnect immunity by like setting up a macro to disconnect if they think they're about to die. But that's a player problem, not a mechanic problem, in my opinion. So if you're playing hardcore and you want to set up a macro to avoid death in a cheesy way, then, I mean, that's fine. You can do that, but are you really engaging with the mechanic of hardcore? And at that point, like, why are you playing hardcore? I don't understand the point. So I don't think it's good to say, oh, we're not giving disconnect immunity to everybody because a small subset of those people might abuse that mechanic. So I understand that like scroll of escape is kind of this middle ground that seems reasonable. The problem is that scrolls of escape are extremely rare. And one of the major issues with scrolls of escape is there's no dedicated or fixed way of acquiring them. So by far the easiest way to get them is by just running around Helltide and killing tons and tons of random elites and stuff and hoping one just happens to drop. Now, that being said, in 100 hours of gameplay this season and doing a whole lot of Helltides in that time, I've seen a grand total of 3 scrolls of escape. So, yeah, they're extremely rare. And that's probably the biggest issue. If there was a more reliable, easy way to have scrolls of escape to where you could just like always have one in your inventory and feel better about having disconnect immunity with a scroll of escape on, that would be better. But I guess at that point there wouldn't be any reason not to just have default disconnect immunity. So I can understand, again, Blizzard's perspective on that. But the reason why I find this so frustrating is that in the past 2 seasons of playing a whole lot of hardcore, I have lost 5 characters in total to disconnect, and I have only lost 3 characters to things that were not disconnects. So the biggest issue with that is that this has never been an issue with my internet. Every single time I've died to a disconnect, it's been me disconnecting specifically from the Diablo 4 servers, and nothing else on my internet was affected. So very often, I play with two monitors, and on my second monitor, I'm very often streaming a show. I'm also very often in Discord with friends talking. And when I've disconnected from Diablo 4, my Discord doesn't lag. I don't disconnect from my Discord channel. Whatever it is show that I might be streaming doesn't lag. It doesn't disconnect. It doesn't stop. It doesn't buffer. None of that stuff happens. So it's not ever an internet issue. It is specifically a Diablo 4 server issue that causes my disconnect and then causes me to die because I can't find enough scrolls of escape to have disconnect immunity. And even aside from disconnects, the other big issue is that the servers are just very laggy. And again, it is definitely a server issue, not an issue with my internet. And I live in the central Midwest of the US, so it doesn't really matter where a server is located in the US because I'm so centrally located. I tend to have fairly good connection to any server anywhere in the continental US in any other game. But Diablo 4, for whatever reason, I get a lot of rubber banding and desyncing of position. And this led to one of my deaths a few days ago. I was farming Duriel on my druid, and Duriel did the slam mechanic where it'll grab you and pull you into its stomach or whatever, and then it essentially one-shots you if it connects with that. And I dodged the mechanic, but my position was desynced, my timing was desynced, whatever, because I got a period of rubber banding, lag spike, whatever, and I ended up dying because of that. So that's really frustrating. So if the servers were better and if there was better disconnect immunity, I would feel a lot better about the permadeath situation. I will say that dying overall doesn't feel too bad, mainly because probably the most fun aspect of Diablo 4 right now is leveling characters, because the leveling system is very good and it feels very rewarding to level up and gain power and unlock your capstones, your key passives, all that sort of thing. But the biggest frustration is, for instance, my druid, I was farming on Torment 3 and I had multiple mythics on that character, and now I've lost all those mythics. So that can be very frustrating. And it will probably be more frustrating next season if the new endgame activities that they're adding in make endgame a lot more interesting and fun and make a more robust endgame so that there's more to do. It will be probably more frustrating to lose a character that's in endgame. That being said, if you lose enough characters in a season, you can only do so much Helltide, because Helltide has just, historically always been just the best thing to do in most seasons, most of the time, to level your characters. So it does get old after a little while. Okay, so that's my thoughts on the negative aspects of the, core component of hardcore, the permadeath of it all. Okay, the second issue with hardcore is the rate at which your offensive versus your defensive scaling happens. And the best way to say this is that it's very easy to scale offensively in Diablo 4 relative to how easy it is to scale defensively in Diablo 4. So a lot of your defensive scaling in Diablo 4 comes from Paragon nodes, and it also can come from masterwork and greater affixes like max life on gear and things like that. So it's a bit of a slower process to get your defensive scaling up. And the problem with that is, in hardcore, you want to be as careful as you can, and you want to build as tanky as you can without sacrificing too much damage. And generally speaking, your approach is just to be as over-prepared for content as you can before trying to go into more challenging content. And honestly, my other two deaths that weren't caused by lag or disconnects were basically me just saying like, oh, okay, I'm going to go into this content and just see how it is. Like, for instance, at the beginning of the season, my first Sork, I went into a Bloodstained Torment 4 Nightmare Dungeon, and I instantly got one shot by the Butcher. So you can't really test the waters, right? You just have to say, okay, I have to be super, super tanky. I have to be over-prepared before I even consider trying this content. So what this kind of forces you to do is to play very disciplined. And so what I mean by that is, let's say you get a character, you finally hit level cap, you're ready to start pushing into Torment 1. By far the most responsible thing you can do at that point is to get a build together that's good enough to start grinding the pit, and then you start trying to slowly grind your way up to getting all of 5 of your glyphs to level 46 and getting your Paragon nodes up. Just because there's so much power to be gained in getting your Paragon and getting glyphs to level 46, and it's a reliable source of power, so you're not reliant on like getting a really good drop of gear or something like that. It's just like put in the time and you get the rewards out of it, assuming you don't die in the process, right? But playing disciplined can also end up being very boring. So for instance, if you're like, okay, the responsible thing for me to do is grind the pit, grind my Paragon, get my Paragon up, get my glyphs up, and then go from there and start doing other things. But if you get bored of that and you're like, man, I really want to go do this other thing instead, I know that for myself, I have had points where I'm like, either I'm going to go do this other thing that's like irresponsible and puts me at greater risk of dying, like trying to farm some bosses or something like that, or I'm just going to get off the game because I don't feel like doing this whole Paragon grinding and glyph leveling thing right now. And so that can kind of take away from the fun if you're always trying to play disciplined and play responsibly in Diablo 4. So if defensive scaling could happen more linearly and more consistently in line with offensive scaling, it would feel better to be able to test the waters earlier and kind of explore and do more things on your build. At least that's been my perspective. I think one other barrier to defensive scaling and scaling overall is blocks in progression that are kind of artificial due to different layers of farming. So that sounds kind of confusing. Let me give an example of this. So again, outside of like Paragon and leveling glyphs, being able to masterwork your gear is another huge source of power and both offensive and defensive scaling, right? Obviously, you need Obdicite to masterwork your gear. If you've played Season 12 at all in Diablo 4, you know that Obdicite has been an extremely scarce resource for most people. So people would go out and say, okay, how do I get Obdicite? And it's like, okay, well, number one, by far, the best way to get Obdicite is to get treasure breaches. Well, how do you get treasure breaches? Well, you just got to get lucky, right? Okay, well, what's like the second best? What's after treasure breaches? And most people are saying Herodric strong rooms in nightmare dungeons. Okay, but how do you reliably farm treasure breaches or Herodric strong rooms? You don't. So all you do is you either get lucky enough to get a sigil that has a Herodric strong room affix on it that lets you to farm strong rooms directly, or you just go do nightmare dungeons and hope you get like the 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 or whatever the chances to have a random Herodric strong room spawn. So it doesn't really feel good when you're like, okay, I need Obdicite. How do I get Obdicite? Well, I need to get these other things. Well, how do I get those other things? Well, there's not really a reliable source to even get the other thing that allows me to get Obdicite. So when you're multiple layers of farming away from getting the thing that you need that's bottlenecking your progression, it can be very frustrating, and you should be like, okay, well, if I don't have a reliable way to get the thing that lets me get the thing, I'm kind of unmotivated to try, right? So if there were more reliable ways to farm all of the things to get all of the things, I know this is like using very general language, but hopefully the example I used of needing treasure breaches to efficiently farm Obdicite and being unable to reliably get treasure breaches illustrates this picture better. But I think, again, that's another painful sticking point that is true across Diablo 4 as a whole, but is felt more acutely and is more obvious for hardcore players because we have to be so careful about, not venturing out and not doing the wrong thing. Otherwise, we would die, right? And this leads me to my third point, which I think is probably the biggest point against hardcore in Diablo 4, is that it's extremely hard to find groups of players to do anything with in hardcore. And this is sort of true in softcore as well, especially later on in the season when most people have quit after a week or two of blasting. But in hardcore, it just feels way worse because it feels a lot better to be able to group up, to be able to share resources and things like that. You can get a lot more out of your farming. If you're in a group of even 2 people, you double your resources and materials needed to say farm layer bosses, for instance. You can double your Infernal Hordes keys. You can double your mats to spawn the boss in Helltide. All of those sorts of things. And so when it's very hard to find a group, all of these things get a lot harder, and it brings me back to my point I made previously that if you have a live service game, if you really want to get the benefit out of a live service game of, interacting with other players and teaming up with other players to make progression smoother and easier, then you're struggling to do that as much in hardcore as far as grouping with them. This may be less true for people who are in clans. Diablo 4 is not my main game. I play ARPGs on the side for fun, here and there. And so I can't commit to a clan and play consistently enough. So I have to rely on random group finder, and the random group finder in hardcore is usually quite bare, like Nightmare Dungeons. Who really cares? Helltide. Who needs a group for that? And then just general dungeons. So these would be kind of the lowest tier activities to me that I would want to group up for. So that's kind of the biggest issue I have is the biggest factor that would probably lead me to go back to softcore next season is I generally can find a lot more groups in the group finder for activities that I think are relevant for grouping to do. And if I'm going to have to suffer through the lag and the disconnects from the servers and everything like that, all of the negative downsides of the live service game, then I want to be able to benefit as much as I can from the positives of the live service game. So there is the positive of the economy being better and opening up trade to be more of an option in endgame in hardcore, but that is relatively minor, in my opinion, compared to how impactful it is to be able to reliably group with players and make your progress easier. So anyways, that's my take on hardcore. Overall, I do think it's fun. I think if they were to fix some of these things, more people would be incentivized to play hardcore, and therefore it would be easier to find groups in hardcore, etc. But as it stands, I think on balance, I will probably be heading back to softcore next season. Thanks for watching.